the Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burton, Gary Cape
and Stephen Molyneux.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Arabian Racing Podcast. We're joined by Gary Capewell.
Hello.
And Stephen Molyneux.
Hi there, Debbie.
Hi. And so we've got two races to look at today. We've got a review of the Emirates Breeders Handicap and 0 to 55 at Wolverhampton. And we'll be looking ahead to our Group 2 race at Newbury this weekend. Gary, if we start with you, the Zayn Zyperian's win at Wolverhampton, that's two races he's put together now. He looks like he's still on an upward curve.
Yeah, he does. I thought he was quite lucky to only go up £2 after he'd won that race previously at Lingfield. But
you got a spoon, Gary. You got a spoon.
But he finally. I mean, he shaped before. In all seriousness, he shaped before his win at Lingfield as though he was probably got a bit more ability than we'd seen, and he'd been a bit unlucky a couple of times last season. So. It's taken a while for the penny to drop, but the penny has now well and truly dropped. And he was a convincing winner, wasn't he? From three veterans, really. I suppose you could say four, five, if you want to go that far enough as well. Al Jawaya again, who's beginning to think as though that that's two decent runs from him back to back now, where he's been a little bit in the doldrums and hasn't always put the same amount of runs or the quality runs together. So. He's looking as though his turn, if they can find a similar race, isn't going to be too far away. Samawat probably continues to frustrate, I should imagine, but she's ran a lot better than she has than the last time, maybe even be last twice, for a young rider who was having one of her first ever rides. And Bin Al Ree bouncing back a little bit as well. Kayak a bit disappointing. K Clare, I wasn't there, so I don't know whether that horse was still in need of the outing. And Upstart Crow, I suppose, was the disappointing one. Travelled well to a point, but we couldn't quite tamely down the home straight. But Zayn Zyperian, as we'd said it before, has promised perhaps more than he's delivered on a few occasions. But the penny looks to have certainly dropped with him now, and that'll probably be it will be the last chance he gets to run in that type of grade. But at least he's got two wins next to his name for a bit of confidence as he has to go up in grade next time out.
Stephen?
Oh, the case for the defence, I suppose, isn't it? For only going up £2 after what Gary said. Look, you've got to give horses a chance, At the end of the day, he'd won a 0 to 55 by a short head. He was the only horse in the race ridden by a professional jockey. And let's not beat around the bush. Sean Levy made a huge difference that day at Lingfield. So he was worth another chance. But he's just a horse that's obviously, as Gary said, getting better and better with racing. I think the stiffer track at Wolverhampton certainly helped him. And he was a very easy winner from a couple of horses who've been running well. Bin Al Ree, who bounced back, and Kayak was obviously a lot further behind Zayn Zyperian this time, but not helped by a pretty wide trip, I don't think. And they obviously like to ride the horse fairly prominently, and just having to go 3 or 4 wide to get a prominent position over the shorter mile just did for that horse's chance in the end. And I agree with Gary. Upstart Crow was the one that could have improved going into a second start in a handicap, but a lesser grade. Dictated the pace, maybe set things up for others. Probably wasn't knocked about when fading, and probably would have finished alongside the 6th or 7th had he had the jockey so wished. But his chance had gone, so it was eased off. But it's nice to see horses progressing, I suppose, and you got to give them some sort of chance, even if it has been at the expense of 1 or 2 others on this occasion.
Yeah, and I think you've got to remember that Zayn Zyperian is a half brother to Zayn's Achilles, who did so well for the owner breeder Paul Simmons, and for the majority of his career, the trainer Peter Hammersley. He won quite a few times, I think, at Wolverhampton, didn't he, Gary? He was a 7 furlong and a 12 furlong specialist, and no distance in between, which was always quite amusing, I thought, really. But he certainly seems to be in the mould of his half brother, and it looks like he can progress again, hopefully.
Yeah, the other thing, I mean, he'd already been beaten 5 times off a mark of 57. So for going up beyond that at that stage might have been a bit harsh. But look, he's obviously progressing. So fair play to Peter Hammersley and Paul Simmons.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
The sweat coming down his brow. He's beginning to sweat a bit, isn't he?
Well, it's 50 degrees outside. Isn't it? Understandable.
Well, he hasn't been running around the racecourse like you, Gary, to be fair.
No, that's true.
Okay, so if we move on now to our group race coming up at Newbury on Saturday, this is the Royal Cavalry of Oman International Stakes, run over 6 furlongs. This was formerly known as the Zabeel International, a race which the Royal Cavalry, of course, had a tremendous record in with their mare Al Muhannad, who won it 3 times. And then they won it more recently with her brother Al Chami back in 2018. It looks like the forecast going, well, at the moment it's good to soft, good to soft in places, with forecast drying weather. So we probably hope that they'll be running on good ground on Saturday. They will, of course, have raced there the day before on Friday, so it will have opened the ground up a bit. So hopefully it will dry out quite nicely. We've got a field of 8. Sadly, no international runners this year. Obviously, the struggles of COVID and Brexit have all proved slightly too much this year, because we were hoping that the previous winner, Conchita Da, may show up. That wasn't to be in the end. So if we go through them, Stephen, what did you think?
Well, for all the reasons that you've outlined, it's obviously become a little bit disappointing. I suppose there is a newish horse in there in the form of Bayan Akhbar, who will be having her first start in the UK, for all that she's trained by Phil Collington. She's a winner over in Belgium. She's had a couple of starts in Saudi. The rating of 100 came from Saudi, so Lord knows what it's worth. But obviously being lightly raced and a winner abroad, then she merits some sort of consideration. At least we've got our highest rated horse in Alcázar in there as well. And he definitely took a step back in the right direction at Goodwood last time. He'd been disappointing in a conditions race over the 1.25 miles the time before that. But just the big thing with all of these really is the trip, isn't it? 6 furlongs, I would say, has become an ever increasingly unused distance in Arabian racing right throughout the world, simply because there aren't the numbers. They're bred to stay further. And a lot of these will be relatively unproven over the trip. So could it be that the 1 or 2 horses who've got experience at 6 furlongs, that certainly brings in a Bayer Akhbar. She was 3rd in what was perceived to be the trial for this race behind a pair of 3-year-olds. So she's proven that she's got the speed to go that sort of trip. So for all she was a bit disappointing at Goodwood last time compared to how she'd run in the race 12 months ago, it could be that the conditions suit her that a bit better on Thursday or Friday, whenever it is.
Yeah, and James Owen trains the 2 horses with winning form over the trip in Alcázar and Maizuna. Alcázar, as you say, he's been a bit in and out and a bit hard to judge on. Certainly he's won at Newbury, and he's also run quite badly at Newbury. But he seems to go on any going. So we'll just have to see what horse turns up. Gary, you're a shareholder in him. What do you feel about the race?
Yeah, like Stephen said, the trip isn't ideal for perhaps many of the horses in the race. A few have probably won over it, including Alcázar, but it's probably not a trip that sees him at his best, or not his optimum trip anyway. And it was on his debut when he won over 6. You got to go back a fair way. He scoped badly the time at Newbury, the run before, which was the reason for the bad run. I spoke to James about this at Goodwood, just asking what had happened. He just said, yeah, he scoped badly, came back, and he's fine now. And he ran all right at Goodwood. I thought he might get 5th. And he travelled well into the race, and I think that's going to be into the interesting thing here, because unless it becomes tactical, which I suppose is always a concern in these type of races, but Stormtrooper's really only got one way of going, hasn't he? He'll be out in front, and in times of when he's performed well in these type of races in the past, has been when he's gone from the front. He's been, I think, 2nd here a few times.
He's third in this race, and then also he's run in the 5.
Yeah, the equivalent that we'd have on this day, but over 5 furlongs as well. Yeah, he was 3rd in Isabel, wasn't he, behind Al Chami, funny enough, a few years ago. So he's going to go from the front. If he gets a soft lead, he's potentially dangerous, but I'm not sure he's quite the horse of old anymore. Not wishing to rule him out too quickly. I mean, on ratings, Alcázar is the one to beat, and he kind of reminds me, with a slightly lesser rating, of a horse who won this race a couple of years ago for James in Orzan, in the fact that he usually travels quite well in his races, and coming off a strong pace will suit him. So, you know, he's got the highest rating. You take, I suppose, a little bit of that with a bit of a pinch of salt, because he would prefer a little bit further. But just how the race might be run might just suit him. Obviously, we've mentioned Bayan Athbar, UK debut for her, Abira Athbar, who we know's got some course and distance form. Don't I think might outrun its odds and outrun its rating, if you like, is the bottom one, Mazuna. Now, I know she was a bit disappointing. He was a bit disappointing in effect here, when finishing 7th in the trial behind Abira Athbar. But I don't think the race was completely really run to suit him. And you know, her rather, I should get that right. If you know, they go a decent gallop, because she's got that turn of foot. I know she's shown it mainly on the all-weather, but she has got that gear change, which could prove crucial. So provided they go a half decent gallop and she just travels into the race, I can see her outrunning her rating, if you like. Yeah, it's a race that perhaps has cut up a little bit, due to, as you said, factors kind of out of our control, really. But yeah, I think Tom Marquand's a good jockey booking for our horse, and yeah, fingers crossed he can run well. It was interesting to see that Jim Crowley at the moment's on Jade. I suppose he's probably had the choice where he's been guided, but obviously we're talking about horses coming back down in trip. I mean, you know, she's never run over this distance. I mean, you know, she won over 1.5 miles earlier on in the season when she was very strong through the line, wasn't she? So, excuse me. So yeah, I mean, she's related to a few that have been all right over probably a mile, maybe a little bit shorter with the odd occasion. But yeah, it's like I say, it's a race that has sort of cut up a little bit, if you like, albeit, you know, the dam of obviously Jade, you know, she did manage to win a group race. She won the 3-year-old race over 7 furlongs. So there's that speed in there, if you like. But yeah, we're very hopeful for Alcasa. I know from a ratings point of view, perhaps a few people are disappointed that there aren't no international contenders. But I'll be honest, I'm quite pleased about it.
No, that's fair enough, Gary. And just a point about actually Jadael and Maizuna. Jadiel has mostly been running in cheap pieces for her entire life. She's now got a visor on, which one would hope is an effort to sharpen her up, dropping down in trip for this first time. And Maizuna, who has always run in a hood bar one race when she finished down the field, she also is exercised in a hood, certainly when I've seen her in Newmarket, although obviously I haven't seen her recently, so that might not be the case. I see she's got the hood left off as well for this race. But yeah, she's a winner on Good to Firm in Belgium, albeit that was a couple of years ago over this trip. So she could quite easily be a little bit of a surprise, albeit not down the bottom of the field in terms of weights, but certainly in the list that we've got with us at the moment.
Yeah, look, you've got to make a case, haven't you, for something to show a bit more for the trip and what have you. But I'd agree with Gary on Stormtrooper. I know he's a 10-year-old, but if you look at his ledger, there's some of the races, the tasks that he's had have been, well, nigh on impossible, I suppose. He was rated 113, beg your pardon, at his prime. The last time you could probably say he had a realistic opportunity was a 65 to 90 handicap at Chelmsford, and that was way back in 2017. So it's been 4 years since he's probably been in a race that he can win. You know, in that period, he's been in Group 1s, Group 3s, you know, the conditions event, that, you know, the trials for this 6 furlong race, he's running it 2 or 3 times. So I think the angle of definitely being able to lead and stay there is very relevant with him. It's his 3rd start of the year, which might help. And obviously last time at Goodwood, he was never going to figure. And I suppose the question mark is, did he show enough speed for long enough on that occasion to expect him to stick it out a bit longer today? You'd almost take the chance that he can. He is a 10-year-old, but you know, he is the one horse that 6 furlongs is pretty much ideal for, and he's going to try and run the finish out of everything else.
Yeah, he did. Excuse me. He did win a Group 3 over that trip in Sweden quite a few years ago, and I think his last win was just short of a mile in Glyn, also a couple of years ago now. So He's a bit harder to keep tabs on because, of course, he runs a lot overseas, and our UK form base doesn't tend to record those results. But yeah, I mean, you know, his first 2 runs over here have been a bit disappointing, but as you say, certainly not with conditions in his favour. I think a lot of these horses should theoretically improve if the ground dries out. The BR Athba being obviously the most notable one. Her run at Goodwood last year was by far a career best in terms of the quality of horses she was running against, and she's not really had ground as quick as that ever since, you know. So I know that Connections were very pleased with how she worked this week when I spoke to them at Wolverhampton on Monday. So it will be nice to see a horse come forward from this and to back it up with the form. And she certainly showed plenty of speed when she won over 7 furlongs at Chelmsford last year. And they had this race in mind from then onwards, really. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, it's obviously a little bit disappointing. There'll be a few wanting Stormtrooper to go off very hard. We've at least got a lot of the top jockeys involved in the race, and Tygo Shea will be having just his 2nd ride of the summer on Bayan Athbar, Jim Crowley, Dane O'Neill, Tom Marquand, Holly Doyle. So if maybe the horses aren't quite Group 2 class, the jockeys most certainly are.
Yeah, one horse we haven't mentioned is Tufan. I see they're trying him in a visor this time. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting that they're trying a different bit of headgear with him. Again, I suppose the question mark is kind of the trip, really, isn't it? But you know, he's not alone in that respect. Something we've already mentioned. So yeah, I think, like Stephen said, a lot of them are going to want to make sure that Stormtrooper goes on and gives them a lead, but they'll be careful. They won't want to give him too soft a lead.
No, absolutely. Well, plenty to look forward to this weekend, and we'll look forward to reviewing the race and the race that we've got coming up at Chelmsford on Thursday next week. So thanks very much, guys. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Cheers, Debbie.
And we'll see you all soon.